the latest round of inter-Korean talks, the DPRK said it plans to send an orchestra to the Winter Olympics. Is this music to the ROK's ears or a distraction from other key issues? And in the wake of the Iranian oil tanker disaster in the East China Sea, how is China dealing with the aftermath? What are the most pressing humanitarian and environmental concerns? Welcome to The Point. Live from Beijing, I'm Li Xin. During a second round of inter-Korean talks on Monday, the DPRK announced it will send 140 performers to the upcoming PyeongChang Winter Olympics in the ROK. The ROK has also announced that it has agreed to the DPRK's proposal of holding working-level talks on Wednesday at the truce village of Panmunjom to further discuss its participation in the Olympics. However, last Sunday, the DPRK state media blamed the ROK for giving U.S. President Donald Trump the credit for the recent talks, threatening to drop out of the talks at any minute. Since denuclearization is off the table for now, where are these talks heading and what further frictions and changes could be just around the corner? Joining me in the studio here in Beijing is Dr. Rong Ying, Vice President of the China Institute of International Studies. Dr. Rong, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Now, on Monday, the ROK originally wanted to discuss the logistics concerning the two sides' joint presence during the PyeongChang Olympics. However, the DPRK has insisted that both sides need to first negotiate surrounding the participation of the 140 performers in the orchestra called Moranbong Band. Why does the DPRK prioritize this item?
I think from the DPRK's perspective, this is certainly for them must be the most important thing. But also, arguably, it is I think, the easiest issue if you look at the issues on the agenda. Certainly, from the ROK's perspective, they would like to go straight to the participation of DPRKs to these Olympic Games. But I think for DPRK, cultural performances is more important because it will give them the advantage to show, to demonstrate, also appeal to the sense of identity or nationalism of Korea as a nation. So.
Yeah, indeed there are reports about the dilemma surrounding the choice of songs that might be included in the final agreed version of the catalogue. For instance, there are reports about the song that's called Mother's Birthday, which pays tribute to the government of the DPRK, and also We Call Him Father, which is obviously celebrating Kim Jong-un. So what are the likelihood that the two sides can come to an agreement as to the catalogues, and what kind of songs will be most facilitating for the kind of atmosphere needed during the Olympic Games?
This is exactly, I think, we have to look at. If the North Korea side, DPRK, insist on putting the songs or the programs that
Mother's Birthday,
that would I would say that it would create more problems and complications to the South side. If they just use it as a leverage for talks, when in the end the two sides came out to agreement on some rather easy or soft songs. For instance, like the folk songs of Korea, that Aliland and others, which I think can certainly appreciated by the two sides and agreeable. That would be a very positive signal or indicator that the talks could go smoothly, or the momentum of talks could go on.
At this moment, we do not know the outcome of or the prospects of both sides reaching an agreement. Another issue that is also causing some attention is the route or the way of transport for the DPRK athletes, officials, media representatives, as well as the performers and the cheering squad. Some people, it has been reported that they will be permitted to travel to the south across the demilitarized zones that divide the peninsula Peninsula, and the ROK have agreed to the request. What is the significance in that arrangement?
I think that, at least for me, there's two important signals, particularly from the DPRK side. First of all, I guess it is also for the sake of convenience. Traveling by air can be costly, but then also I think can have problematic in vis-a-vis the UN Security Council resolutions, which bans the things like that. But more importantly, I guess DPRK want to show the confidence that by crossing that line, they are more symbolic that bring the two nations together. And but of course, ROK has pledged, has committed that they will ensure the safe passage of these performances, which is again very significant.
Mm-hmm. Well, these are some of the details
exactly.
that were being negotiated. Let's look at the atmosphere, the environment, let's say, at this moment, or details that are on the outside. For instance, the DPRK state media has slammed the South for giving U.S. President Donald Trump the credit for these talks and threatened to drop out any moment. What President Moon Jae-in said is, I think U.S. President Donald Trump deserves big credit for bringing about the inter-Korean talks. So my question, what makes me wonder is, knowing the kind of response that will surely come from the northern side, why did President Moon still praise the U.S. President and say there's potentially putting the talks at some kind of risk?
This is, again, I think, demonstrate the kind of a dilemma or kind of very awkward position of ROK, President Moon in particular. On the one hand, I think it earnestly want to improve the inter-Korean relationship, want to have reestablish, taking this opportunity of the Olympic Games to resume the talks so that the tensions will be reduced and the communications will be resumed. But on the other hand, this is still have to go line with U.S. policy, particularly the question of nuclear issues. So I think by at the press conference, by thanking or by acknowledging the credit of President Trump, you want to tell the U.S. that, look, we are not going to change the so-called line, the unified line. In the mean, so that of course naturally would raise oppositions and from the DPRK side. But I think, as far as I'm concerned, these are the usual or expected sort of games. So I don't think, as I said, that would so far would undermine or change the positive momentum of the talks, which serve the interest of the two sides. So.
Yes. Well, President Trump called Chinese President Xi on Tuesday. He asked Xi about his opinion on the situation on the Korean Peninsula and also emphasized the importance that the two sides continue to communicate and coordinate on the issue. Why do you think he did that at this particular moment? And what's the significance of the U.S. and Chinese President talk at this moment?
Well, I think on the question of the North Korea's nuclear issues, China and the U.S. has been maintained very solid and good sort of communications and consultations. And naturally, with such a development happening on the peninsula between the two Koreans, the two presidents and two leaders would exchange views, compare notes, and make sure that that consensus would remain true. And I think from Chinese perspective, it is also given an opportunity to make our position clear that, first of all, we welcome this development, and secondly, we support that, and more importantly, we hope the international community here in the United States will support this momentum. As I said, it's a hard-won momentum, must continue. And from the U.S. perspective, I can understand that they would like to, the Chinese side, and while supporting this process, it would not undermine or they shows some differences, in terms of the UN Security Council resolutions, but which I think we have made very clear that not being changed.
So to make sure that China is he knows China's position, and China is in the same rank, let's say. However, it is also very interesting that the foreign ministers and senior government officials from some 20 countries will be convening in the Canadian city of Vancouver for the so-called Vancouver meeting that is being co-chaired by the US and Canada, excluding China and Russia, on the so-called enforcement or stepped-up enforcement of international sanctions regime. How do you look at it? Because this is a very strange meeting. First of all, the makeup of the countries are almost exactly the makeup of countries that were providing combat forces to during the 1950-1953 Korean War, right? And then on the other hand, China and Russia have been excluded from that meeting. What does that meeting want to achieve, and how effective do you think it can be?
That meeting, I think, as far as I know, was well prepared. I mean, before the announced that later development, I mean, which started when Kim Jong-un announced in the New Year's message that he would like to participate in the Olympic Games. So that was, I think, I don't know whether there's a connection, but don't see such a connection. But the question is that, as you asked, that raised that, why? What is the relevant? I mean, what kind of message? I mean, this meeting is going. It could have been postponed, like the joint military exercises between South Korea and the U.S. So the very fact the U.S. wanted to go ahead, send a mixed message. For me, I think complicating this dialogue. But of course, I think this is the fact of life, and this is also the complication we are facing. I only hope and that the conference would come up with some positive things and supporting this momentum, not rather than accomplishing it. And also, I think to putting these groups, outdated members groups together, while leaving important members like China and the UN, which are
China and Russia,
which were the member of the UN Security Council, is very, I think, unfortunate. I don't think it's a positive way to do that.
Basically, they want to bypass the United Nations,
which
to
is
forge some kind
very
of
unhelpful for this.
Well, let's see what they can achieve on this meeting. Anyway, I think the idea that they want to bring this group up, bring this memory up, is already sending a very mixed signal. Anyway, let's keep a close eye on the situation. Many thanks, Dr. Rong Ying, Vice President of the China Institute of International Studies. And as I said, the momentum on the ease of tensions on the Korean Peninsula is hard-won and needs to be cherished. It is important to keep up international pressure so that the DPRK will be persuaded to give up its nuclear program. But can the Vancouver meeting achieve the goal without derailing the inter-Korean talks that have just begun? And to group the countries that provided combat troops to the Korean War in the 1950-53 period would only bring back bad memories on both sides, that nobody won in that war. Hence the impasse we are seeing today. Instead of talking about filling the gap in the international sanctions regime, to bring the Korean War to an official end is probably the real gap that needs to be filled here. You're watching The Point. I'll be back right after this. China is continuing its efforts to clean up the massive oil slick in the East China Sea after the disastrous collision between the Sanchi, an Iranian oil tanker, and the CF Crystal freighter, a Chinese cargo ship, off the coast of Shanghai on January the 6th. The tanker was carrying some 136,000 tons of light crude oil, and it caught fire with 32 crew members on board, 30 from Iran and 2 from Bangladesh. Now, despite China's all-out efforts, the Sanchi exploded and eventually sank, leaving no survivors so far. 3 bodies have been found, while 29 others are still missing. The disaster has also raised major environmental concerns about the sea and the surrounding areas. So what special challenges did rescue efforts encounter in this disaster? How can the accident be prevented from becoming the biggest oil slick from a ship for decades? case, as termed as feared by some experts, and how are countries cooperating to solve this crisis? Joining me for the discussion are Professor Rockford Whites, Director of Maritime Studies at Tufts University in Massachusetts, and Xu Qingduo, Current Affairs Commentator in Beijing. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. Qingduo, first of all, explain the situation a little bit to us. What is the state of the rescue and search operation at this moment? Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi was reported to have promised to his Iranian counterpart that Beijing would not give up searching for survivors, but it was also reported that the search and rescue operations had been cancelled or was cancelled on Monday. Exactly what is the stage we're in now?
Well, right now, since Monday, you can say, the search and rescue operation has been replaced by cleanup operation because obviously there's a huge oil slick. The size of it has been doubled since Sunday. So everybody is looking at the environmental impact right now because in general we have passed the stage of recovering the bodies or rescuing the sailors, I would say.
There were reports by major Western news outlets about China not doing enough to save the Sanchi sailors. Images of the Chinese firefighting vessels spraying foam on the ship were released. However, some reports quoted the vice president, for instance, of an Iranian shipping NGO saying China was not cooperating enough in putting out the fire. Exactly what was China doing? Could China have done a bit more, Qingduo?
Well, I would like to extend my condolences to the families of the victims who are mourning and remembering the beloved ones. Obviously, this is a tragedy, a huge tragedy. Nobody would like to see happening more than 10 days ago. And there is no reason, China somehow delayed the efforts to search and rescue the sailors over there. But there's a difference people need to remember probably. After the collision, the oil tanker caught fire, and the oil tanker carried with it is the so-called condensate. It's highly flammable and ultra light, and after collision it was on fire. There's huge poisonous gas. It was toxic. It is with high temperature, and obviously the temperature was not helping, and the Chinese side has tried several times not successfully, but they did recover the black box and also recover the 3 bodies, and they sent a drone to search and rescue and also monitor the situation with the ship. But I guess they would do what they can.
Mm-hmm. Professor Whites, from your experience and your research, what would be the risks associated in the rescue and search operation after such a dangerous disaster involving an oil tanker on the open sea and in rough weathers?
I think it's a very good question. I agree with the prior comments. I think from my perspective, the Chinese Coast Guard and the rescue efforts, which was an international effort, they did a very good job under the circumstances. The circumstances were very challenging. An oil tanker that's on fire is not easy for any search and rescue. From my perspective, I think that the Chinese efforts have been very reasonable and very capable, and it's a tragedy. It's really a human tragedy of the loss of life, but I think that finger pointing toward the rescuers as somehow not doing enough is not fair to them.
Well, right now, some people we are really focusing on the environmental disaster, as it is assumed that the hope has all gone for finding any survivors. Qingduo, what is the Chinese assessment on this front?
I think it's not, it's this agreement basically. The Chinese side, obviously, with the sinking of the ship, the hope is gone to save any extra lives, from the oil tanker, because itself is, sinking to the bottom of the ocean. And also, this is also the understanding from the Iranian side. Basically, I think my spokesperson from the Iranian side basically said, there's no hope to recover even the bodies of some of the sailors. The Chinese side, the rescue area has actually expanded to like 1,000 kilometers over the sea. You can see there's a lot of efforts going on in trying to retrieve the bodies or any clue or any equipment from the oil tanker. But I think in general, unfortunately, the stage is past, and now we are focusing on the environmental impact.
Professor White, what are the dangers to the environment we are potentially looking at? There are different understandings at this moment. Some people are saying this could be the biggest oil slick in this area for decades, while other people are saying because of the substance of the oil that was being carried on this tanker, known as condensate, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, that it is relatively easy to handle. Could you give us your take on this question?
Well, my take is that I think this could be a major environmental disaster, and I think that shifting the effort toward environmental cleanup and mitigating the potential risks, particularly to the fishing grounds in the China seas, is very important and the right thing to do. Part of why it's hard to answer your question is that we don't know how much of the condensate oil, the light oil, was burned off in the accident. It's highly flammable. If a lot of it did burn off in the fire, that would mean less of an environmental disaster in the water. And part of the situation, and this is very common for accidents involving oil tankers, is that we don't know yet with certainty how much oil is still on board the vessel that has sunk.
What kind of danger is it for the marine lives that are in the immediate surrounding seas, Professor White?
The danger is significant. Condensate oil, the type of oil that's on this vessel, is highly toxic. It will go into the marine ecosystem. It will be ingested by marine life, fish and marine mammals, and therefore this is potentially a very large environmental disaster.
Qingduo, from China's perspective, do we have the kind of expertise and experience to deal with this kind of aftermath on such a scale? And if not, what kind of support do you think China might need?
Well, remember this, let's say, pollution is not only to the Chinese side of the sea, it's also polluting basically the area like basically of Japan, of South Korea, of adjacent countries here. In general, China, in this aspect, you would say is a developing country. It's not commanding this all the skills and all the equipment basically to clean up the oil in a quick and efficient manner. So it takes a lot of efforts and probably even help from like the United States or UN or other international organizations.
At this moment, what are the international efforts coordinating with each other? We know that in the aftermath, trying to put out the fire, there have been rescue ships from the ROK, from Japan, joining the effort on an informal level. Right now, is there some kind of international cooperation being organized to combat the environmental aftermath? Qingduo?
Well, no, not officially. Let's say, obviously, there's like a necessary cooperation between China, Japan, and South Korea, and then the three countries all basically, did what they can to cooperate with each other. Like, you should share the information, and you should also share even the technology, how to continue, because it's spreading from one part to another. You cannot say like I clean my part and then leave the other part just somehow undone. No, you have to have this joint efforts to really clean up this the aftermath.
And are we foreseeing a long-term battle coming up, trying to clean up the seas there?
I would say so, because the light oil itself, you know, before the ship sank into the ocean, there was a lot of fear. Say the worst scenario could be the sinking of the ship, because not only the light oil with the sinking ship, but also the fuel of the ship itself will also spread, will also create the flake, oil flake on the ocean. So it takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of skills, and a lot of time. Basically, the light oil will be there, basically, they say, for weeks, years, even decades.
Mm-hmm. And finally, the Iranian government also declared Monday a national day of mourning for those who have lost their lives in the accident. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani expressed his condolences and called on government agencies to investigate the tragedy and take any necessary legal measures. By the way, it was the second accident in less than 2 years involving a tanker owned by the same company. Do we have any clue what might have caused the accident? Any lesson to be learned from this accident?
It's a good question. You know, first of all, you can see this is like less than 2 years ago. There was another incident, basically also involving an oil tanker from the same Iranian company. That was a collision with a Swiss container ship, you know, off the Singapore Strait. And this time around, many people asking the question, you know, first of all, like this happened in the open sea, not a narrow channel. And this oil tanker is supposed to be equipped with sophisticated radar system and other technologies to prevent exactly this kind of collision. But still, it took place. And of course, for other countries in the region like China, Japan, and South Korea, you know, like a cross-border cooperation. And also for the Chinese side, say, you know, a coordinated center like probably need to be established, which crosses provinces, crosses different level of governments and different ministries to work together in a more efficient, more timely manner.
Okay, we have to leave it there because of time constraints. Many thanks to our two guests, Professor Rockford White, Director of Maritime Studies at Tufts University in Massachusetts, the U.S., and Xu Qingduo, Current Affairs Commentator in Beijing. And here is my last point. I've said on my Twitter account, and I would like to repeat it here, it's really sad to hear that there is no hope for the missing Sanchi crew. My thoughts and prayers go to those who perished. It is an unfortunate accident which nobody wants to see, and I have confidence that the Chinese authorities have done all they can, bearing in mind the danger and complexity in the rescue efforts involving an oil tanker. The news also made Chinese headlines for days, with millions of domestic audiences following live reports on how the government is dealing with the accident. Not to do the utmost would be something unacceptable for the Chinese people either. That is it for this edition of The Point. Download the application called CGTN to watch our show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got the point.